The cult of Jay-Z is a group of mainly old men now that see Jay-Z as this near messianic figure that's a business genius, the greatest rapper ever, and also somebody that cares about the well-being of the lower class people and advancing them. Despite many of his actions demonstrating otherwise, they still choose to look the other way or find a justification for several of these. And this is the brilliance of what Jay-Z has been able to create. Law 27 reads, "Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. People have an overwhelming desire to believe in something. Become the focal point of such desire by offering them a cause, a new faith to follow. Keep your words vague but full of promise. Emphasize enthusiasm over rationality and clear thinking. Give your new disciples rituals to perform. Ask them to make sacrifices on your behalf. In the absence of organized religion and grand causes, your new belief system will bring you untold power." There are 5 steps it lays out to successfully have your cult up and running. Step 1, keep it vague, keep it simple. The first order of business described is generating attention, not necessarily through action but through words, which are described as hazy or deceptive with 2 components, a promise of something great and transformative, but also really vague on what that looks like in reality. This combination will stimulate all kinds of hazy dreams in your listeners, who will make their own connections and see what they want to see. Jay-Z lays this out perfectly, both in his socially conscious lyrics and the lyrics helping people escape poverty, the most infamous in my memory being the following lines from his song The Story of OJ, where he raps, "I told them please don't die over the neighborhood that your mama ran. Take your drug money and buy the neighborhood, that's how you rinse it." This sounds great, and the rapper Rollo actually did this, but Jay-Z has never done this, and he's far richer than Rollo is, as well as Gervonta Davis, the boxer, who did this in his home city too, although unfortunately it burned down very soon after. You want to know what's more important than throwing away money at a strip club? Credit. You ever wonder why Jewish people own all the property in America? This is how they did it. Again, this is true. However, how does one with poor credit get out of that situation? And it's a lot easier when you have a family history and lineage of great credit, being taught about money at a young age, and having jobs and professions that pay an above average income. I bought some artwork for $1 million. 2 years later, that ish worth $2 million. Few years, that ish worth $8 million. I can't wait to get this ish to my children. Y'all think it's bougie, I'm like, it's fine, but I'm trying to give you $1 million worth of game for $9.99. I turned that 2 to a 4, 4 to an 8. I turned my life into a nice first week release date. Y'all out here still taking advances, huh? Me and my guys taking real chances, huh? Y'all on the gram holding money to your ear. There's a disconnect. We don't call that money over here. This is one of my favorite verses on the project because I love how it sounds in the delivery, and he's totally right. But this game is worthless because the struggle most people face is not going from, let's say, 100K to $1 million, but from 0 to 1. And you can't really teach that. It's too hard, and you can't fit it in a song. But that's the point. It's vague, it's simple, and people in the cult of Jay-Z were on social media talking about this like it was the most profound and life-changing thing they had ever heard. Mission accomplished. Step 2. Emphasize the visual and the sensual over the intellectual. Once there are people following you, trusting you, the problems you can run into are boredom and skepticism. If people get bored, they will find someone else to follow, and if they start thinking a bit too rationally, well, they're going to come to the conclusion that this isn't what they had initially believed it to be. How does one offset that? Through theater. That's something that has been used historically by governments, but it works in a cult setting as well. Grand visuals, luxury, and funnily enough, it even says, soothing music for hearing. You might even tickle the mind, perhaps by using new technological gadgets to give your cult a pseudo-scientific veneer, as long as you do not make anyone really think. There are examples of this all over, but let's start with the last one, technology, which also mixes a bit of step 1. In September of 2022, Jay-Z teamed up with Jack Dorsey, former CEO of Twitter, to bring crypto to Jay-Z's childhood home, Brooklyn's Marcy Project houses. They came together to fund a 12-week Bitcoin Academy at the houses that was meant to teach cryptocurrency, but people weren't receiving it too well. There was mixed response. Keep in mind the dates, which are very important here. The last Bitcoin peak was about $65,000 for one Bitcoin in November of 2021, with the wild crypto and even NFT hype that was happening that year. By September of 2022, it had dropped to about $19,000. A lot of people were losing faith in it, but it would have been a great time for them to actually buy it because as I'm writing this, it's since gone up to $51,000. which is something that one of the alums of the program who originally thought it was a scam would eventually say, "I come to find out, you've just got to know how to work it. When you put money into it, you just let it sit there and you let it grow." I didn't know that was working something. And another saying, the class wasn't telling them, "Yo, take your life savings and convert it into Bitcoin." Take something, put it there, and just let it sit. Funnily enough, in hindsight, putting their whole life savings into it would have been the best bet. But that wasn't the majority of responses, despite the completion of the program granting someone $1,000, which is definitely value for getting a free class. Others had fairly negative criticisms. "How are you helping us if you're asking us to put in $5, $10, and we're all on fixed income?" Inquires Lydia Bryant, 57, who says after the course she still felt like her money would be safer in, quote, real stock. For you to take your money that you worked for or your government-assisted funds and invest it in something like Bitcoin, that's really risky. That's a no-win. Another source who requested their name to be omitted also tells him, "I can't be gambling with money that I get from my retirement." Jay-Z was right, and they were wrong. But this was all visual and sensual because other than the simple mechanics of getting a wallet and putting money in it, there isn't really much else to learn. On top of that, even if someone who's already in poverty managed to put $10,000 in Bitcoin and hold it for another 2 years, and it reached a peak again, they would have made $20,000, which isn't life-changing money at all, but Jay-Z knew that. Crypto was a very hot tech, though. And how great does it look for the press that billionaire Jay-Z is educating people from his old neighborhood in it? Taking a step back into things that are visually grand, what better than Jay-Z's luxury homes, such as the $190 million mansion he and his wife bought in Malibu, California? His company, Roc Nation, has been producing the Super Bowl halftime show since 2020, soothing music for hearing, as Jay-Z's entire music career, in particular 444, where he isn't trying to deliver any smash hits, and it's a real smooth listen. Step 3. Borrow the forms of organized religion to structure the group. This one's slightly off the course of what Jay-Z has done. It urges the individual to bring together their following in a way that elevates them in status and compares it to the power organized religions had with rituals for the followers, hierarchy, ranks, names and titles, whilst asking them for sacrifices that will stack money for the man and bring more power. An important quote, though, is, "You are not a dictator. After all, you are a priest, a guru, a sage, a shaman, or any other word that hides your real power in the midst of religion." And this is best illustrated by Jay-Z's response to Nardwar's question. This isn't a knock or a dig at Jay-Z, but it just goes to show how he views himself and how he thinks, very artistically. And this is also translated into how a lot of his cult-like fans view him, which is something like a shaman or a guru that is hidden most of the time, doesn't speak much, but when he chooses to come out, it's a grand moment, an album, a new deal, something spectacular that doesn't really happen often from him. And that's in part because Jay-Z is almost certainly an introvert, but it adds to the shroud of mystery around a cultish figure. When it comes to asking people for sacrifices, Kanye West was at one point Jay-Z's, not right-hand man, but the next in the pecking order, and he chose to really limit the reach and sales and profit of his album The Life of Pablo when he said, "My album will never, never, never be on Apple, and it will never be for sale. You can only get it on Tidal," which spurred a ton of piracy for the album in the subsequent weeks, until it was eventually put on all streaming services. And in the spirit of being fair, Kanye was a minority shareholder in Tidal, but he was making a very huge sacrifice in revenue at that time by not allowing it to be on all streaming services. Jay-Z had removed all his music from streaming services other than Tidal, but he owned all his masters and he was the majority shareholder in Tidal too. The closest thing to an event that elevates the status of everyone there in this step would be Jay-Z's now either on pause or discontinued Roc Nation brunch, where every single celebrity in hip-hop you can imagine is there, and some from other genres too. It was seen as a rite of passage in the eyes of fans and for people who were invited for the first time because they had achieved enough to warrant recognition and an invitation from Jay-Z for a once-a-year lavish and exclusive event. Step 4. Disguise your source of income. After the following is built and money's starting to flow in, you can't seem hungry or desperate for money. So this is the time to be ambiguous with how your money is made, which is a bit more difficult for someone like Jay-Z, but someone who does this step incredibly well is Rick Ross. Regardless, it says to surround yourself with luxury and make it seem like your wealth came from your money-making methods as opposed to your followers' pockets. The idea is they think they can copy your moves, but it hides how the money is really generated. This is a loose tie-in. After all, it's evident that a musician's initial money is made from, in Jay-Z's independent case, sales of his music, his merchandise, Rockaware, his performances, but that's a fraction of his actual wealth. The majority of it came from the liquor brands, which we'll refer to again very soon, Armand de Brignac and Douce, his investments, be it art, real estate, and others. Let's just take a look at the breakdown on the Forbes article where they first declared him a billionaire in 2019. Armand de Brignac, or Ace of Spades, $310 million. Cash and investments, $220 million, largely from his $2 million investment in Uber in 2013. Douce, $100 million. Tidal, $100 million. Rock Nation, $75 million. Music catalog, $75 million. Art collection, $70. Real estate, $50 million. Just taking a look at this, the liquor was nearly half of his net worth, with the music being nearly the smallest, and it likely is in the current year, 5 years later. But how were the liquor brands, Tidal, and Rock Nation built? Well, that brings us to step 5. Set up an us versus them dynamic. Now it describes how to keep your group tight-knit and following you, which is something every successful belief system has done. The followers need to believe they're a part of an exclusive team of sorts that's unified with certain goals and against others. Think of America having once been seen as the land of freedom, for instance. In order to strengthen this unity, you have to create, or sometimes just point out, the idea that an evil enemy is out to destroy that value that bonds everyone. In America, it would have been communism at a certain point, and that anyone who disagrees with this notion is an outsider and is trying to destroy the group from within. In Jay-Z's case, there have been several, mainly race and class-based, which can sometimes intersect but not always. For instance, just going back to 2015, Jay-Z and many other famous superstars changed their profile pictures and banners to this mysterious shade of blue. Nicki Minaj, Jay-Z, Rihanna, Beyonce, Kanye West, Madonna, Usher, and more. This was all to promote the new streaming service that Jay-Z had bought, Tidal. It was originally called Aspiro. It was set to compete with the behemoth that is Spotify and also Apple Music, along with places like Amazon Music and Pandora. It had no free tier, and the selling point was that it was a, quote, black-owned streaming platform, the only one, and that it would pay the artists more, which doesn't incentivize the majority of listeners much. Which makes sense considering the subscriber numbers there were pitiful, and it was mired in controversy. At one point, they claimed 3 million users, but a Norwegian newspaper said it received internal documents that it was closer to 350,000 in 2015 and 850,000 in 2016. Imagine now. A good amount of people did support it though, subscribing to the cult of Jay-Z. It was black-owned and they wanted to support. But Jay-Z would forfeit that title by selling it for $300 million to Jack Dorsey's Block, bringing Jay-Z on as a board member for the company that runs Square Inc. too. Now this was controversial not just from Jay-Z's side but from the business side too. Jack Dorsey even caught flack for this. There was a class action lawsuit filed by the shareholders of Block Inc. for approving the purchase of Tidal, in that it was a bad faith purchase, saying, quote, seemed by all accounts a terrible business decision. In the lawsuit, it says the following: Block facilitates payment processing and helps individuals transfer money electronically. It had never ventured into the music streaming industry, and at the time it acquired Tidal, had no plans to do so. The idea for the acquisition came to Jack Dorsey, Block's founder, CEO, and chairman, when he was summering with Carter, Jay-Z, in the Hamptons. From his Hamptons retreat, Dorsey joined a video conference meeting of Block's board and proposed that Block acquire Tidal. The board formed a transaction committee to consider the proposal. Over the ensuing months, the committee learned that Tidal was failing financially, losing its major contracts, and facing an ongoing criminal investigation. The committee also learned that Carter personally loaned Tidal $50 million from an offshore company to help the troubled company through its difficulties, and that Dorsey was the sole Block management member in support of the acquisition. Despite the obvious problems with the deal, the committee approved the transaction for $306 million. It seemed by all accounts a terrible business decision. And it was, but the judge chose to dismiss the case, saying that they're free to make a terrible business decision as long as the directors approved it. But think about it, these investors have a right to be upset. What sense does it make for a company that works in payments to buy a failing music streaming platform? It doesn't. And they believe that it was done as a favor to a friend from Jack Dorsey to Jay-Z, which also elevated Jay-Z into Block's board. Another business move that he made that elevated his status was when he made the move into president of Def Jam after the whole Rockefeller acquisition. But while this happened in 2021, Block had a $100 billion market cap. So the money they spent on this was a fraction of any amount that mattered. Think of how it would look on Jay-Z when Tidal eventually ran out of money and had to shut down. It would be disastrous for his reputation. It wasn't even in competition with any of these other streaming platforms. But if he can get Jack Dorsey to buy it for $300 million, he looks like a business genius. A flip of 5x from what he bought, and getting on the board of a massive corporation? Meanwhile, the actual product and company Tidal is still failing, but nobody cares about that or looks into it. There's also the racial component for us versus them. In the prior case, it wasn't too heavy, but in this one, it's a bit stronger. Let's circle back to 2006, for instance. It has come to my attention that the managing director of Cristal, Frederick Rousseau, views the hip-hop culture as unwelcome attention. I view his comments as racist and will no longer support any of his products through any of my various brands, including the 40/40 Club, a club that Jay-Z owned in New York. Nor in my personal life. This is what Jay-Z had to say about the CEO of the wildly popular liquor brand Cristal at the time, which Jay-Z was heavily promoting. Unfortunately, though, this wasn't exactly what was said by the CEO. The Economist article wrote the subheading of that segment himself as unwelcome attention. Frederick never said those words. Reading it verbatim, Frederick Rousseau, who took over from his father as managing director of the winery in January, says that Roederer has observed its association with rap with curiosity and serenity, but he does not seem entirely serene. Asked if an association between Cristal and the bling lifestyle could actually hurt the brand, he replies, "That's a good question, but what can we do? We can't forbid people from buying it. I'm sure Dom Perignon or Krug would be delighted to have their business." Take the opportunity to read this article for yourself. The writer positions Cristal as having been something for Russian czars, and then contrasts it to now being loved by bling rappers. He's coming in with a certain narrative and lean, and wants to use the CEO to further the narrative. Which he doesn't, but he speaks in a way that would upset some people. It can be interpreted that way, but if we are to be completely unbiased, let's evaluate. This guy Frederick was born and raised rich in France. His father was running the company before him. It's 2006. Hip-hop is definitely not the genre dominating in France completely, although some people have crossed over. I don't doubt it had its popularity, but also think of the demographic. An old guy in France? Also, the racial component is something that, while it exists in other countries, doesn't exist in the same way that it does in America. And we could interpret the last sentence as his competitors would have loved for the promotion, but he was fortunate enough to get it. Maybe that's cutting him too much slack. Or you could say that he doesn't care for it. But in the spirit of fairness, he could have just said he didn't know or was thankful and kept it pushing, which Jay-Z expanded on in his Decoded book. When asked about an influential segment of his market, his response was, essentially, well, we can't stop them from drinking it. That was it for me. I released a statement saying that I would never drink Cristal or promote it in any way or serve it at my clubs ever again. Why not just say thank you and keep it moving? You would think the person who runs the company would be most interested in selling his product, not in criticizing or accepting criticisms of the people buying it. The whole situation is probably most interesting for what it says about competition and the way power can shift without people being aware of it. Good point made by Jay-Z. But later, Jay-Z would join the liquor game himself, twice. In 2012, he launched Douce as a partnership with Bacardi, which despite a couple of hiccups between them, is still an ongoing business deal. And in 2014, he bought a 50% share in Armand de Brignac, or Ace of Spades, which has bore a lot of fruit. This previous stance he took won him a lot of good faith and respect, and while I won't say his intention was to use it to launch a liquor brand because he didn't do that until 2012, the NFL is a different story. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick was already staying seated during the national anthem, but decided to kneel before a game this time. This stirred a lot of controversy, and many believe he was never signed again or given a chance because of this. Nobody knew exactly the reason why he did it. A lot of things were going on at that time, creating racial tension in America, and people attribute his kneeling as a protest of systemic oppression, safe assumption considering the massively viral police shootings of Black Americans that happened around that time. Jay-Z chose to show his support. In a performance on SNL in 2017, he wore a custom Colin Kaepernick jersey. In his song Ape-ish with Beyonce, he raps, "I said no to the Super Bowl, you need me, I don't need you. Every night we in the end zone, tell the NFL we in stadiums too." But soon after, in 2020, it was announced that Jay-Z and his company Roc Nation were discussing a partnership with the NFL, and was quoted as saying, "I think we've moved past kneeling. I think it's time for action." The partnership was sealed. Roger Goodell, commissioner of the NFL, agreed to contribute $100 million plus to social issues, whatever that means, and Jay-Z would get to run the Super Bowl halftime show, which he has been doing with his company Roc Nation since 2020, as well as any other NFL-related music events. An NFL player, Eric Reed, who was among the first to join Kaepernick in kneeling, said, "When has Jay-Z ever taken a knee? To come out and tell us we're past kneeling?" The jersey, the lyrics, the us versus them, black versus white organization, were all leverage that Jay-Z was bringing to the negotiating table. He had them on their knees, pause and no pun intended either, but he was willing to give them a way out, if they just partnered with him. It's been 4 years, and who has it benefited since then? Jay-Z, the NFL, and those surrounding him, just like every other major move he's made. The reversal is rather interesting. We haven't really had one the past episode or two. One reason to create a following is that a group is often easier to deceive than an individual, and turns over to you that much more power. This comes, however, with a danger. If at any moment the group sees through you, you will find yourself facing not one deceived soul, but an angry crowd that will tear you to pieces as avidly as it once followed you. The charlatans constantly faced this danger, and were always ready to move out of town as it inevitably became clear that their elixirs did not work and their ideas were sham. Too slow, and they paid with their lives. In playing with the crowd, you are playing with fire and must constantly keep an eye out for any sparks of doubt. Any enemies will turn the crowd against you. When you play with the emotions of a crowd, you have to know how to adapt, attuning yourself instantaneously to all of the moods and desires that a group will produce. Use spies, be on top of everything, and keep your bags packed. For this reason, you may often prefer to deal with people one by one. Isolating them from their normal milieu can have the same effect as putting them in a group. It makes them more prone to suggestion and intimidation. Choose the right sucker, and if he eventually sees through you, he may prove easier to escape than a crowd. This has yet to happen to Jay-Z. There have been moments where he appeared like he was on shaky footing with the public perception, but one of the biggest strengths that Jay-Z has is the lack of an urge to talk too much. Someone who did face the wrath of this reversal was, let's say, a Harvey Weinstein, who had positioned himself as this progressive that was for all these causes. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was the spitting image of what he demonized. This mainly only happens to artists that are either very far on social justice and extra judgmental of others, or the opposite side when they don't know their fan base. For instance, Daniel Caesar made comments defending his friend Yes Jules at the time she was getting hate from black women, and he believed the hate to be unjustified. After all, he knew her personally, but that was his fan base. So he either had to rail on his friend with them, or just stay out the way while they were firing at her and not say anything. That harmed him, but he was able to recover later on and still have a successful career. Make sure to subscribe for more. I'm trying to hit 1 million.